Welcome back to My Seminary Life. I'm your host, Brandon Knight, and today I am here to piggyback off of last week's episode where I reviewed NPR's podcast series, Extremely American, by asking the question, are there more than one kind of Christian nationalism? How many kinds of Christian nationalism are there? And just to set the table as we get into this episode, I'm going to say yes, there is actually at least two kinds of Christian nationalism. They're both not ideal, but I think by the end of this episode, you will see why I think there are two forms of Christian nationalism and why that's important for those of us who care a lot about trying to slow down the momentum of Christian nationalism. So, in case you missed last week's episode, I encourage you to go back and check it out. But over in last week's episode, I reviewed NPR's series Extremely American, where in season 1 they dive into the world of alt-right militia groups, but in season 2, the more so the focus of that episode, they dig into the world of Christian nationalism, specifically looking at Doug Wilson and his church empire that he has created and continues to run throughout America among his compadres to try and turn America into a Christian empire, a new Christendom. One of the reasons why I wanted to listen to NPR's take on Christian nationalism is because, as I discussed in that episode, it doesn't take long for me to find like-minded Christians like myself who have spoken out against Christian nationalism. I wanted the outsider's opinion. You know, NPR is concerned definitely about the rise of Christian nationalism in America, but I was curious to get their informed opinion on it from an investigative research perspective. In today's episode, I want to talk about how after listening to their series and doing the review for last week's episode and kind of poking at some of the main tenets and features of Doug Wilson and his guys' form of Christian nationalism, I started to reflect upon it, and I began to realize that the Christian nationalism covered by NPR, promoted by Doug Wilson, and the kind of Christian nationalism that myself and other creators that I know who have either seen it or experienced it firsthand, there is some differences. There are similarities. You know, this is more of a case-by-case scenario. There are some similarities depending on the person that I've talked with or come to encounter. But I began to notice that the kind of Christian nationalism being pushed by Doug Wilson and some of the Christian nationalism that I have seen on a smaller level, on a more personal level, I guess you could say, I think are two different kinds of Christian nationalism. And I want to talk about that here today. Just to keep matters simple, I'm dividing them into two groups: soft Christian nationalism and hard Christian nationalism. I don't think we need to get more complex than that, at least not at this point. Soft Christian nationalism and hardcore Christian nationalism. Yeah. Now I actually want to address the listeners out there that maybe have been very outspoken against Christian nationalism, and it sounds like here today I'm really starting to split hairs. And the answer to that is, well, yes, that is what I'm trying to do. We have, those of us who often fall into the very non-Christian nationalistic camp, are also the ones who constantly talk about the importance of nuance. And so, yeah, I'm going to get a little bit more nuanced here today because I think that is merited. I think, though, both forms of Christian nationalism, soft nationalism and hardcore Christian nationalism, though both are not biblical, both are misunderstandings, misteachings, and misapplications of Scripture, I do find one, the soft Christian nationalism, softcore nationalism, to be much more benign than hardcore. Over the past 5 years, with the rise of this subject matter and the rise of these groups, especially in the online spaces, I think we have turned Christian nationalism as a term into a catch-all umbrella term. And one thing I have noticed when you are talking to people who maybe fall somewhere on this spectrum, that one of their biggest defenses is, well, what does that term even mean? Let's define our terms. And that is what I'm trying to do here today. Through my own personal experiences and some of this more robust systemizing of the of this Christian nationalism that NPR did, I'm trying here to get more nuanced, maybe separate these two groups a little bit, because one I find to be much more damaging than the other, and one I think could use a bit more grace in online spaces when people like me are talking about them, or when we are ministering to people who fall into these categories. So now that my fellow creators are sitting there fuming at the fact that I'm willing to do such an audacious thing as extend grace to Christian nationalists, let's go ahead and divide this up. Again, hardcore Christian nationalism and softcore Christian nationalism. I want to start with the hardcore Christian nationalism because that is what I talked about last week. That is Doug Wilson and all of his associated acts. Hardcore Christian nationalism, and I think what is the dividing line between the two camps, is the desire to turn America into a Christian empire, to turn it into a new Christendom. Anytime you start seeing that word Christendom being tossed around, run. Do not engage with that material, or if you are, I hope you're engaging with it in a offensive kind of matter. I truly believe that the more damaging form of Christian nationalism, the form that it could potentially rewrite everything, history and the future, is the Doug Wilson hardcore form of Christian nationalism that at its core, though there is more to their system of faith, and you can hear more about that by going back and listening to last week's episode, I think the central focus, and I would believe they would agree with me on this, is to turn America into a Christian empire. They may use better terms like disciple the nations into Christendom, because I don't think the goal is just to stop with America. I think that is the starting point of a much larger worldwide takeover. But the core of hardcore Christian nationalism and the dividing line between the two is the desire to make America a new Christendom. And there is more to that beyond that point, but that's the line. That then, and again, I know I'm like spending no time on those people, but I talked about those people last week, so go listen to last week's episode, because that means I really need to focus on soft Christian nationalism, softcore nationalism. What is that? That, I would say, is what I have experienced a lot in my life. Soft Christian nationalism is extremely patriotic Christians. Yes, that still does describe the other group. The hardcore Christian nationalists are bleeding red, white, and blue Americans. But within soft Christian nationalism, there is no desire to take over America and turn it into a new Christendom. Instead, they're just very patriotic Christians. And these kinds of people do exist. There are people who think this way. I have, one big sticking point that I have had, I probably have talked about it here on the show before, and I know was a big sticking point when we first started, when the online spaces first started really coming for Christian nationalists, is that we should not have the American flag in the sanctuary. And I'm willing also to put the Christian flag into that category as well. One, because I don't know why we need it. We already have baptism and communion and the cross. How many more? Why do we need a flag? But also because hardcore Christian nationalists have started using that as their official flag. So let's separate ourselves from that. But one of the big sticking points was the American flag should not be in the sanctuary. And here's the thing. I agree with that. And there are going to be churches that have the Christian flag in the sanctuary who do fall on the hardcore spectrum. But I have been in churches, softcore nationalists, who have the flag in the auditorium simply because it is decorative trimmings. That's it. That's the whole thing. These are the kinds of churches that, they sing the national anthem at a special 4th of July service, or Brother Bob is going to get up and sing, "I'm proud to be an American, where at least I know I'm free," right around the 4th of July or Memorial Day or whatever. Like, by the way, did you know there's a Canadian version of that song? That guy wrote one for Canada as well. Bleeding heart hardcore Christian nationalists now, but at one point in time also tried to get famous in Canada, writing them the exact same song, but switch it up for Canada a little bit. Anyway, in softcore Christian nationalism, you have an extremely patriotic Christian. Again, hardcore Christian nationalists are extremely patriotic Christians, but there is no desire among softcore nationalists to turn America into a new Christendom. They may say things like, we were founded by devout Christians, or, where we are a Christian nation. They may say things like that, but there is no malicious intent to take over America for Jesus. There is not that among softcore nationalists. And if you don't agree with me, go to a small church and minister to one. This is my experience. These people do exist. Not all Christian nationalists want to take over America. There are Christian nationalists who, they are just proudly American, and that's it. They have the revisionist history of our founding fathers being, super devout Christians. But that's about it. I think a lot of this, without being a history expert, but just learning. Again, that's my gimmick, right? That's my thing. I'm the lifelong student. My thing seems to be, I think what it looks like to me is a lot of this has to do with the 1950s and the 80s. In the 1950s was the, I would say, height of cultural Christianity, of that whole, you just go to church because that's what you're supposed to do, and, good Christians love America, and the whole bit. It was the 80s, Pat, when it was the 80s under the religious right, the moral majority, Reaganism, where the split happened, where you do have still this proudly American Christian, but also it is time to go to war Christians. I think that is another big difference, is that the hardcore nationalists are going to be the ones who talk way more in terms of warfare than the softcore Christians, or Christian nationalists, I should say, softcore nationalists. That the hardcore nationalists are the ones who went the direction of, we need to take back America through force, through action. Whereas soft Christian nationalists kind of just celebrate being American in church. And yes, there's a fine line there, and it is a slippery slope, but I'm willing to put a little bit of a gate there, not a gate. I'm a little bit willing to put like a marker there that there is a difference. There is a difference there. Because if there are people, and I do think there are, Christian nationalists who have no intent of taking over America for Jesus, and that they're just proudly American, look, that's still not ideal, but we need to not categorize them the way that we're categorizing a person like Doug Wilson. So, my purpose here today has been to just simply make it known that we need to better systematize this thought. There has been attempts by those of the more hardcore Christian nationalist side to actually start systematizing their doctrine, to systemize their theology, to establish doctrine. And I really think, though it is, it's not fun to read, I really think this is a healthy step in the right direction. I think we need to better understand what this term is, what it is not, and to better identify it when we are seeing it in the wild. Because that does navigate then how we interact with other believers, especially those who fall into this category. For those of us in the creator spaces who want to use this as a platform to dialogue and to speak out against it, we do need to start taking these steps. We do need to not just know, but systematize what we are talking about so that way we can better engage with it. We can't just continue to slap the label on anything that we don't like. It is time for us to start moving forward with a better understanding of what we are actually talking about. And that's all I got to say. I know it's a little bit of a shorter episode here today, but that's okay. You're okay with that, right? Maybe you have a short commute to work and you needed a short episode this week. So there you go. Thank you all for listening to today's episode. If you haven't yet already, please rate and review the show wherever you get your podcasts and pass this episode along to a friend so that way they can be angry at me for the fact that I'm doing this. And if you are angry at me for trying to extend a little bit of grace and to remind us all that we need to pray for our enemies and to love those who persecute us, then Jesus said that. Then you can send me a message, email seminarylife@gmail.com, where you can just be mad at me for the fact that I'm trying to do things nuanced. You can also check out the other great shows here on the Anazao Ministries podcast network, like The Homily, The Whole Church podcast, and my sister show, Kung Fu Pizza Party, where I deliver high-flying action in 30 minutes or less and serve up some wisdom one slice at a time. You also check out my YouTube channel, Studio 219, a place for faith and pop culture. I'll be back here in pretty soon with you all to talk about other things. Things for you and for me. That's one of my favorite Christmas songs. It's so cheesy. It's a Michael W. Smith, The Christmas Waltz. I like the Michael W. Smith version. Incredibly cheesy. Still have Christmas music stuck in my head. But thank you again for listening. And until next time, this is Brandon signing off, reminding you as always that theology is for everyone. So keep on studying.